For our third anniversary, I cooked a full French dinner, but my husband never came home. When I called, a woman picked up and said, "Who is this?" "He's sleeping. Try again tomorrow." So I cleared out the house and walked away. He collapsed when he found the signed divorce papers waiting for him. That sinking feeling when your world shatters in an instant, that's exactly how my third wedding anniversary began. What I thought would be a romantic night turned into a nightmare, all thanks to a sickeningly sweet voice on the other end of the phone, my husband Samuel's secretary, Alice. I stood there at the cinema entrance, watching the minutes bleed into half an hour. 7 p.m. came and went, but Samuel never showed. A cold dread seeped into my bones, telling me he was with her again. Defeated, I walked back to an empty home, past the candlelit dinner and the wine I'd lovingly prepared. Instead of joy, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Alone, I drowned my sorrows in wine, trying to numb the pain. Late into the night, I dialed his number. But it wasn't Samuel who answered. A syrupy voice purred. "Who is this?" "Samuel is asleep. Call back tomorrow." It was Alice. The alcohol hit me harder, but nothing could dull the cruel reality. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, wide awake until dawn. The next day, Samuel called, sounding tired. "Grace, you called me last night?" "Don't overthink it. It was just a last-minute friends gathering, and I drank too much." I stayed over at Alice's place, but I slept on the couch. Nothing happened. I didn't respond. I just hung up. We didn't speak for a week. He didn't come home that morning. When I arrived at the office, a bouquet of bright roses sat on my desk. I scoffed, grabbing them and tossing them straight into the trash. Samuel always did this. When I was upset, he'd give me the silent treatment, waiting for me to cave, waiting for me to apologize. A week would pass, and when he didn't get what he wanted, he'd send roses, a peace offering, signaling he was ready to forgive me. And for 3 years, I'd been a fool, forgiving him no matter what, all because of a bouquet of flowers. For 3 years, I'd been nothing more than a puppet, letting him manipulate me, with no regard for my own dignity. I used to wonder why I never thought of escaping, but now I realized I was so caught up in my feelings that I didn't even recognize how little I valued myself. But now, I was tired. Those roses no longer stirred anything in me. That evening, just as I was finishing work, Samuel unexpectedly appeared at my office entrance. In 3 years, he had never once picked me up after work. This was a first. I walked over to him and calmly asked, "What's the matter?" Maybe my tone was too cold, because Samuel seemed taken aback, a little awkward. I had always been the one to lower my head and please him, but not anymore. He scratched his head awkwardly, trying to mask his discomfort. "Last week was our anniversary. We had planned to watch a movie and then go home for a candlelight dinner. I'll make it up to you tonight." A cold smile tugged at the corners of my lips. "Anniversary? You missed it, and now you want to make up for it?" "No need," I replied flatly. "Also, the ride I booked is here. Thanks for coming to pick me up." Without another word, I turned and got into the car. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Samuel standing there, his hands stuffed in his pockets, looking a bit lonely. The next day, as soon as I entered the office, I noticed the light on in the general manager's office, which had been dark for the past 2 months. The previous manager had left, and no one from headquarters had been assigned to take over until now. Looks like they finally decided on someone. My curiosity got the best of me, and I walked over to take a look. To my surprise, I saw Samuel, focused on his computer, glance up at me. "Good morning." My brows furrowed. I couldn't hide my shock. Samuel and I worked for the same group, but he was based at headquarters, while I was at the branch office. I never imagined the new general manager would be Samuel. I quickly glanced at the small partition outside the general manager's office. Sure enough, there was a new desk there. So he brought Alice with him. How wonderful. Not only was he coming here to keep an eye on me, but he was also bringing his lover along. I gave a neutral reply, "Good morning," and quickly headed to my desk. As I walked through the open office area, I overheard the gossip from my colleagues. No need to guess, it was all about the newly transferred branch general manager, Samuel. "Hey, did you see? The new general manager is the star from headquarters, Samuel, the VP from the operations department. He's so handsome." I heard his secretary, that rumored lover Alice, came along too. "He's got it all, career and beauty. Envy-worthy." I heard Samuel's married. "The rumors say it's with someone from our company." "I think it's Grace, our branch's operations director." As soon as they noticed me approaching, a group of women fell silent. I sat down at my desk and got to work for a while before Alice walked over with her graceful steps. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks asked you to come to his office." I nodded and followed Alice to his office. When we entered, Samuel stood up and closed the door behind us. I looked at him. "Just tell me if you need something." Samuel hesitated for a moment. "It's nothing, really. I just wanted to let you know that the transfer to the branch as general manager was something I requested from headquarters. I didn't have the chance to inform you beforehand." He paused again. And as for Alice coming with me, that was the CEO's decision, not mine. I maintained a calm expression as I listened. Something about Samuel's demeanor today felt off. In the past, he had never been this deferential with me. This was a decision from headquarters, Mr. Brooks, I said coolly. There's no need to inform me ahead of time. If there's nothing else, I'll be going now. Suddenly, Samuel grabbed my wrist, his grip tight and frustrated. I've explained everything patiently to you. What else do you want? In the past, if Samuel had ever done something wrong by me, his lowly apology would have touched me deeply. I would have cried my eyes out, believing he was the best man in the world. But now, my heart was numb. I wouldn't be moved by such cheap theatrics anymore. I didn't yell, didn't struggle. I just looked at him calmly. Samuel, like a deflated balloon, suddenly let go of me, his enthusiasm completely drained. He sighed deeply, looking at me with a helpless expression. I admit, I didn't tell you the whole truth that night. I was drunk, but I didn't stay at Alice's place because I wanted to. She suddenly had a stomachache, and I didn't feel right leaving her alone, so I stayed to look after her. I only said that to avoid making you overthink things. As for my transfer to the branch office, it's only because I wanted to have more time to spend with you, Grace. When did things become like this between us? I remained silent, the air thick with an uncomfortable tension that seemed to stretch on forever. Samuel seemed to recall something and pulled a small, delicate box from his drawer, handing it to me. Here. You mentioned this was beautiful a while ago. I glanced at the box. Inside was Cartier's latest diamond necklace. In the past, he'd never liked me wearing jewelry, saying it wasn't that he couldn't afford it, but that it looked too flashy. I was surprised that he had broken his own principle this time, but I had no intention of accepting it. Some things only seemed desirable at a certain moment, but once that moment passed, they lost their appeal. Just then, Alice entered the room. When she saw the situation, she pretended to apologize. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a file waiting for Mr. Brooks to sign. I turned my face away as Alice walked over and placed the file on Samuel's desk. Oh, is this the new Cartier necklace? I've been wanting one for so long. Alice's words made me freeze for a moment. I quickly grabbed the box and handed it to her. If you like it, it's yours. As soon as Alice took the box, Samuel snatched it back with frightening coldness in his voice. It's not for you. I watched as the joyful expression on Alice's face instantly faded to shock. I didn't pay attention to their argument and just gave a slight smile before turning and walking out. That evening, I moved into the small apartment I had bought for myself a while ago. It wasn't very spacious, nor as luxurious as Samuel's house, but it was my own space, my own home, and it carried only my own traces. Plus, it was much closer to the office, making my commute more convenient. After 3 years of marriage, suddenly returning to a single life felt a little strange. When I was with Samuel, I used to wake up early every morning to make breakfast for him. After breakfast, I would help him choose the right clothes and tie for the day. Not to mention, I always made sure to get home early to cook dinner for him. And I no longer had to spend sleepless nights worrying about the latest rumors between him and Alice. Suddenly, I didn't have to do any of those things anymore, and my time had opened up. I felt a sense of lightness. At first, I worried that Samuel, that persistent man, would come to bother me, but it turned out I was overthinking it. Since I moved out, he hadn't asked about me at all. Occasionally, we'd cross paths at the office, but we just nodded politely, without exchanging any words. I found this to be just fine. Neither of us was interfering with the other's life. A month passed in the blink of an eye, and I had dedicated my newfound free time to focusing on my work. Looking at the figures for the month, I realized that my performance had actually doubled. It turned out men only held me back from advancing in my career. I even admired myself for not giving in and seeking reconciliation with him after all this time. It turns out that I, Grace, can be self-centered too, and I don't have to be anyone's doormat. On Monday morning, we had our usual weekly meeting. My regular spot was always the first seat on the right-hand side of the general manager, but when I walked into the conference room today, I found that Alice had taken my seat. I paused for a moment, feeling a bit irritated, and sat down next to her instead. All the colleagues in the meeting room turned to look at us, clearly noticing that Alice was in the wrong spot. She was just a junior secretary, and she wasn't even supposed to be attending the meeting, let alone occupying my seat. In the past, the secretary's job had only been to set up the meeting room. I had no idea what had gotten into Alice today. Samuel glanced at Alice for a second, but said nothing. It seemed that he had silently approved of Alice attending the meeting. Normally, after the general manager introduced the meeting topic, I would be the first to report on last week's progress. But this time, after Samuel spoke, Alice, sitting at the first seat, took over and she didn't hold back. She launched into a long report about Samuel's schedule and summarized the number of contracts he had signed. The whole room was shocked. When did these things become part of our report? By the time it was my turn, I couldn't hide my displeasure. I could tell that Samuel wasn't pleased either, though he kept it in check. After the meeting, Samuel purposely waited until everyone had left. Grace, stay behind. I need to talk to you, he said, closing the door behind us. Before I could process what was happening, he had pushed me against the wall. Are you ever going to stop? I glared at him coldly. What did Mr. Brooks mean by that? Samuel was seething, his chest heaving as he glared at me through clenched teeth. You know exactly what I meant. I shot back. You moved out without a word, ignored me for over a month, and yet you're still not done? A cold laugh bubbled up inside me. I had thought that Samuel, lost in Alice's warmth, would have completely forgotten about me by now. But apparently, I was wrong. He had been counting the days, waiting for me to beg for reconciliation. I stared at him coldly, silent. Samuel, I said, breaking the silence. Let's divorce. Samuel looked at me in disbelief. What did you say? I said, let's divorce. I'm willing to let you be with Alice. Suddenly, Samuel snapped. He grabbed my neck with both hands, his breath hot and furious in my ear as he growled, Is it because of those rumors that you're going to divorce me, Grace? Are you out of your mind? I won't agree to this. Samuel's grip on me was tight, and I coughed violently, struggling for air. It wasn't until someone knocked on the door to come in and clean that Samuel finally reluctantly released me. I gasped, breathing heavily. By the time I made it back to my desk, the memory of Samuel's rage still lingered, leaving me feeling shaken. From that day forward, Samuel insisted on driving me home every evening and loudly declared to the whole office that I was his wife. At first, I tried to avoid him, turning him down every time, but he would push the rideshare drivers away, making me feel embarrassed and helpless. After a few days of this, I gave in. He begged me repeatedly to move back in with him, but I remained firm in my refusal. The home where we'd lived together for 3 years once held so many beautiful memories, but now all that remained were the scars of our past. Those happy moments had slipped away, never to be reclaimed. The day Samuel made his announcement, Alice confronted him, causing a huge scene, and then she took a week off. As for Samuel, he began making extravagant efforts to win me back, treating me with an exaggerated kind of attentiveness. He would pick me up and drop me off every day, no longer just for special occasions, but as part of his daily routine. He even bought my favorite breakfast, made sure I had afternoon tea, and delivered fresh fruit to my desk every day. On weekends, he'd come over and cook for me, and I had to admit, his cooking was surprisingly good. But in my heart, I felt nothing but emptiness. It all seemed like an act, a performance to make me feel something again. The truth was, I felt nothing. I was numb. A week later, on another Monday morning, we were all gathered in the meeting room, waiting for Samuel to start the departmental meeting. But to my surprise, Samuel didn't show up. Alice wasn't there either, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of confusion. I returned to my desk, but curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the phone to call him. When he answered, his voice was hoarse and tired. Mr. Brooks, you missed the meeting this morning. Are you coming later? There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice sounding softer, almost defeated. Is work all you care about? Can you show some concern for me? Oh, are you feeling unwell? Over the phone, Samuel coughed a few times. My lungs aren't feeling right. I think I might have pneumonia. I just ordered some medicine online and took it. Could you come over after work to keep me company? He asked. I hesitated for a moment. Well, see if it gets worse. Go to the hospital. Don't wait too long, he urged. After work, I initially had no intention of going, but Samuel called again. He said his pneumonia seemed to have worsened and asked me to come take him to the hospital. I decided to go anyway. Even though we weren't a couple anymore, I felt it would be right to help as a colleague if I could. When I rang the doorbell, Samuel quickly opened the door, looking nothing like someone who was sick. Once inside, I noticed the dining table was laid out with a lavish dinner, complete with wine and roses. Seeing my surprise, Samuel hurriedly pulled out a chair for me. I told you I'll make up for our anniversary. Please, Mrs. Brooks, allow me the honor today. Samuel had dressed up in a suit and bow tie, looking quite sharp. Honestly, at that moment, I felt a flicker of emotion, but it was fleeting. If he had done this 2 months ago, the outcome might have been different. But now, it was a little too late. I sighed inwardly, but didn't refuse his gesture. We quietly ate dinner, sipped a little wine, but Samuel's mood was anything but calm. He looked deeply into my eyes and suddenly, with rapid breaths, he pulled me into his arms and onto the sofa. I didn't understand why, but at that moment, my body reacted in a way I wasn't expecting. Maybe it was the alcohol, or perhaps it was the connection we once shared, but just as I was on the verge of losing control, I felt something strange under the cushion of the sofa. It was a thong. And that thong didn't belong to me. Instantly, the heat between Samuel and me was doused like cold water. Both of us froze, and it was as if the alcohol had worn off in an instant. Samuel's face turned pale, and he began to nervously explain himself. Grace, no, it's not what you think. This thing is just, save your explanation. You can have your fun. I slowly, calmly straightened my clothes, then stuffed the thing into his collar. I took a taxi home that night, and as I did, I realized that I had finally given up. His calls flooded in, but I simply turned off my phone, pulled the blanket over my head, and fell into an exhausted sleep. From that moment on, I completely cut off all communication with him, except for work-related matters. Whenever he tried to drag me into his car after work, I'd just call the police. If he showed up at my door, I'd do the same. Samuel, scared by my resolve, finally stopped pestering me. I even noticed that Alice had returned to work as well. From then on, the relationship between Samuel, Alice, and I became strictly professional. I wasn't sure if Samuel and Alice still kept in touch after work, but they were definitely more restrained around the office. Time passed, and about a month later, a university classmate of mine who had been working abroad for years suddenly announced he was coming back to the country. Henry, our class monitor, quickly organized a reunion and invited me to join. Henry and I were in the same city and had a good relationship. We would occasionally meet up for meals. I casually asked around and confirmed that neither Samuel nor Alice would be attending, so I decided to go. That evening, I wore a sleek black evening dress and did my makeup with care. However, due to an issue with some operational data, I arrived a bit late. As I approached the door to the private room, I could hear loud voices from inside. I walked toward the slightly ajar door, intending to find a quiet corner to sit, but when I reached the doorway, the scene inside left me frozen for a moment, unable to react. Alice was wearing a form-fitting dress that perfectly highlighted her curves. Her legs were clad in fishnet stockings, and she was sitting on Samuel's lap, her long arms wrapped around his neck. The two were locked in an embrace, sharing a passionate kiss. Below them, a group of men and women were cheering and clapping, chanting loudly, "Kiss. Kiss." It was obvious that both of them had drunk too much. Alice coyly puckered her lips, about to kiss Samuel. My sudden appearance froze everyone in the room. The classmates had always known about the complicated relationship between Samuel, Alice, and me, but they also knew very well that I was Samuel's legally wedded wife. When I walked in, both Samuel and Alice snapped to attention, suddenly sober. Samuel tried to pull Alice off of him, but Alice pretended to be even more intoxicated, clinging to him tightly. Her eyes were full of defiance as she looked at me. Henry, our class president, felt the awkwardness and quickly stood up to greet me. "Grace, you're finally here. You're so late. We all thought you weren't coming." I smiled lightly. "Well, everyone who shouldn't be here is here, so how could I not show up?" With that, I walked up to Samuel and Alice, took out my phone, and started recording. Why not kiss? This free show, I'd like to see it too. Samuel froze, his face contorting in irritation as he tried to swipe my phone out of my hand. "Are you crazy?" he snapped. Then with force, he shoved Alice off his lap. I put my phone away and pouted, homage, what a buzzkill. The party ended on a sour note, with the classmate who had returned from abroad becoming an awkward side character. He even apologized by drinking 3 shots, feeling quite embarrassed. When I got home, I turned off the lights and sat on the couch, crying my heart out. I began to reflect on these years of entanglement between Samuel, Alice, and me. The truth was, Samuel and Alice had known each other since their childhood. They were not just lovers, but also childhood sweethearts, and they had been each other's first love. I, on the other hand, was the newcomer in their story. Samuel came from a wealthy family, a typical second-generation rich man in town, while the Brooks family, my family, had made their fortune from scratch. When I graduated from college, Brooks, the company my father had built, suddenly faced a financial crisis. They urgently needed an investment of $100 million, but Alice's family was too ordinary to help. At that time, I had already been in love with Samuel for 4 years and had even confessed to him, only to be rejected. I had told my father about my feelings for Samuel, and he remembered it. When Brooks faced its financial troubles, my father was approached for funding. He immediately suggested a marriage between our families, and Samuel's father naturally agreed. Perhaps in the eyes of our parents, business interests outweighed everything. The marriage and feelings of the next generation were just things to be sacrificed and negotiated. Right after I graduated from college, Samuel and I got engaged. On the night of our engagement, my father transferred $100 million into Brooks's account. A few months later, we naturally got married. Again, during this time, Samuel never showed any signs of resentment toward me. He didn't bring up Alice anymore, although I still felt like his thoughts were a mystery to me. Despite that, he was always kind to me, a competent husband, and he made sure I was respected as Mrs. Brooks in public. The changes, however, started 2 years ago with Alice, who had gone abroad to study after graduation. She suddenly returned home earlier than expected, and from that moment, Samuel and she rekindled their relationship, spiraling completely out of control. At first, I had confronted Samuel, demanding to know why he had lied to me, but all I received in return was a cold and cruel response. He told me that even though we were married, he had never loved me. Our marriage, in his eyes, was merely a transaction. He said he only tolerated me because it was part of the deal to avoid causing any loss to either of our families. But Alice's return destroyed whatever restraint he had left. Moreover, Alice had come back with clear intentions, and she directly applied to become his secretary. She was always by his side, and with that closeness and familiarity, it was only a matter of time before things went wrong. At one point, I had considered simply holding on to the title of Mrs. Brooks, unwilling to let it go. As long as I didn't back down, Alice would always remain the secret mistress. For the past 2 years, I had endured countless hardships, but now I was tired. I no longer cared. If they were so eager for me to step aside, then I would let them have it. But what confused me was why Samuel was still pretending. Even though I had already mentioned divorce, he still refused to agree. He kept trying unwillingly to salvage our relationship. Was he afraid that a divorce would ruin the business interest between our families? If that was truly the case, then I had something I needed to discuss with him. That evening after work, I decided to visit Samuel in his office. Let's have dinner together tonight. I've made a reservation at your favorite restaurant, I said, taking a deep breath. Samuel, busy with his work, looked up at me in surprise. His expression quickly changed to one of excitement, and he snapped his laptop shut. It's about time to leave anyway. Let's go now. I'll drive. At the restaurant, I made sure to order a few of Samuel's favorite dishes. His mood seemed to lift as he dug into his meal, cutting into his steak with a happy smile. He looked up at me. So, have you finally calmed down? He asked, his voice light and teasing. I quietly watched him and spoke calmly. Why won't you divorce me? Is it because you're worried about the impact on both of our family's interests? Samuel, who had been cutting his steak, suddenly froze. His expression instantly turned cold. Are you asking me this because you called me out for dinner? He shot back. Yes, this is important to me. If it's because of this, I suggest we involve both our parents. Before I could finish, Samuel slammed his knife and fork onto the table, cutting me off sharply. Stop guessing. It's not about that. And don't bring it up again. I was startled by his sudden outburst and didn't understand why he was so sensitive about this topic. As I sat there, unsure of how to respond, a phone call interrupted the silence. Samuel immediately answered it. Yeah, I'm eating. What's wrong? Are you feeling worse? I'll come over right away. After he hung up, Samuel grabbed his coat and rushed out, not even sparing me a glance. A wave of frustration rose within me. Samuel had never acted this way before. Even though he had always been a proud, domineering man, he would never have treated me like this in public. I guess the call had come from Alice. So I paid the bill and followed him in a cab. To my surprise, Samuel didn't drive to Alice's house. Instead, he went to a high-end private hospital. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow him inside. Was Samuel sick? He walked into the gynecology and obstetrics department, pushing open the door to an examination room. My heart sank. Why was he here? Was Alice pregnant? I hurriedly followed a doctor who had walked in ahead of him, standing just outside the door. Through the gap, I could see Alice leaning against Samuel, and the doctor was handing Samuel a medical report. I was about to eavesdrop, but just as I was about to listen in, the doctor suddenly stood up and closed the door. I froze in shock, relieved they hadn't seen me. I quickly took the chance to slip away unnoticed. Standing at the entrance of the hospital, a fire of rage surged inside me. Those two. How dare they? Behind my back, they'd gone as far as getting her pregnant, and yet he still wouldn't divorce me. What on earth was he dragging me through this for? From that day forward, Samuel and I were reduced to nothing more than colleagues, strictly business. Meanwhile, Samuel and Alice's time off became more frequent, often at the same time. It made sense though. Alice was pregnant. Of course Samuel would be involved in every doctor's appointment and checkup. Many of our colleagues had noticed their strange behavior, especially given the already obvious tension between them. I could often hear whispers of gossip among the staff, though they were careful to speak behind my back. One morning, as the elevator door slid open, I found myself face to face with Alice. It had been several days since I'd last seen her. She'd taken some time off, and I hadn't expected our paths to cross so soon. Alice stood there in a white dress that clung to her slim frame. Her pale skin appeared almost ethereal under the fluorescent lights, and she looked more fragile than I remembered. She had always been slender, but now she seemed even thinner. I couldn't help but wonder if she had just recently become pregnant, though there was no visible bump. I guessed it might be too early to show. As soon as Alice saw me, her body stiffened. She turned away abruptly, twisting her back to me, and sneered with a clear air of disdain. The fury that had been simmering in my chest for weeks, ever since I found out about her, flared up in an instant. Without thinking, I shot her a mocking smile and locked eyes with her. "What's with the sneer?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Are you enjoying being the other woman, pregnant by a married man? Does that make you proud?" Alice's face twisted with disgust. Her eyes flashed with irritation as she snapped back, "Are you crazy? When did I ever get pregnant by a married man?" I couldn't contain my bitterness any longer. "So you can do it but not admit it?" I retorted with a cold laugh. "Go ahead, tell me. I'll even help you out." I saw the fury rising in her eyes. Without warning, Alice raised her arm to shove me, but I was faster. I grabbed her arm and with force flung her aside. Just then, the elevator doors opened. Alice stumbled backward, crashing into the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and before I could react, I rushed forward to catch her, but then, as if on cue, Samuel appeared. He grabbed Alice with surprising speed, pulling her into his arms. For a split second, I thought everything would be okay, that he might help her. But instead, he freed one hand and slapped me across the face with a resounding crack. The sting of the slap burned across my cheek, and my mind went numb with shock and anger. "Grace, you're out of your mind," Samuel shouted, his voice filled with disbelief and anger. "Alice is in a weak condition, and you still dare to push her?" I stood there, holding my cheek, my blood boiling. The anger I'd kept bottled up for so long finally erupted. I pointed a trembling finger at Samuel and screamed, "Do you have no shame? You got your mistress pregnant and still have the nerve to defend her in front of me." Samuel's face froze, his expression twisted with confusion and disbelief. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice shaking with incredulity. "I got whose belly big? Are you talking about Alice? You're insane. This is all in your head." I opened my mouth to tell him about the hospital visit, the way I had seen Alice there, so far along in her pregnancy, but before I could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Employees began trickling in to clock in, their murmurs growing louder. The sight of the boss and executives arguing in the middle of the office entrance seemed out of place, disruptive, uncomfortable. I quickly bit my lip, feeling the weight of the eyes on us. Without saying another word, I sidestepped Samuel and Alice, my chest tight with pain, and made my way to my desk. Sitting down, I couldn't shake the feeling of suffocating. My heart was heavy, and the confusion gnawed at me. I didn't understand. If they were so in love, if Alice was really carrying his child, why couldn't they just let me go? Why did they need to rub it in my face? Was Samuel deliberately trying to humiliate me? Was this his cruel way of making me watch as his child was born with his mistress by his side? The questions swirled in my mind unanswered as I sank deeper into the confusion and hurt. The next morning, I made up my mind. The decision felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders, yet it also felt like stepping into uncharted territory. I couldn't let Samuel or his indifference keep me tethered any longer. I prepared the divorce agreement with deliberate precision, my fingers moving mechanically over the papers as I drafted the final terms. Once it was done, I placed it on Samuel's desk, an unspoken challenge in the form of a neatly signed document. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold, sterile air of his office, trying to steady my nerves. I had no illusions about the battle ahead. If he found another excuse to avoid the divorce, I wouldn't let him. I was ready to fight for my freedom, to claim what was rightfully mine, my life. But to my surprise, Samuel didn't hesitate. He glanced at the papers briefly, signed without a word, and slid the pen back across the desk. The divorce was finalized the very next day. It was over. I could hardly believe how smoothly it had gone, but the relief was short-lived. As the weight of what had just happened sank in, I realized just how suffocating my life had been in this house, with those two people who had become so repulsive to me. The thought of wasting any more time with them was unbearable. I was done. Months ago, I had been approached by a competitor company, offering me the position of general manager for one of their branches. The catch was that it was in another city, far from everything I knew and far from Samuel. At the time, I hesitated. Would he approve? Would he stand in my way? But now, with everything that had happened, I no longer cared. Without thinking twice, I quickly sent them an email inquiring about the position, though deep down, I didn't expect much. And I had no idea if they had already filled the role. To my surprise, they responded almost immediately. The next day, they flew to meet me for an interview, their enthusiasm unmistakable. The meeting was a whirlwind. Within hours, they made me an offer. Start immediately. Everything moved so fast, my head was spinning, but there was no time for hesitation. I needed to get out of here. I knew I couldn't resign in person. Samuel would never let it go without some sort of scene. So I sent him an email. I called him afterward, just to confirm everything. When he answered, there was a long pause, as though the sound of my voice had caught him off guard. Then, without emotion, he muttered. The indifference in his voice was almost suffocating. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response, instead focusing on the future I was about to create for myself in Shanghai. I quickly set up the new branch, my career taking off in ways I had never imagined. The company that hired me was in the same industry as Samuel's, and the bitterness that had been simmering inside me for so long found its outlet in the competition. I made things difficult for him, targeting his resources, always striving to outdo him. Each success I had felt like a small revenge for the years I had spent sacrificing my own happiness. When I heard that Samuel's business had dropped nearly in half over the last 6 months, a part of the frustration I had been holding inside me finally began to ease. It wasn't that I enjoyed his failure, but it was a reminder that I was no longer bound by his presence, no longer dependent on his approval. It had been half a year since we had any personal contact, and I had no idea what was going on with that couple. I assumed my life would never cross paths with him again. Alice was probably about to give birth by now, I thought. My new life had nothing to do with him anymore. Then, on the eve of the new year, everything changed. I had come back home to celebrate, looking forward to the peace and quiet of my own space, but when I opened the door, there he was, Samuel, standing at my doorstep. I froze for a moment, staring at him as a cold wave of disbelief washed over me. What was he doing here? I didn't move. I didn't want him to step inside. "Mr. Brooks," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Here to wish me a happy new year? There's no need. I'm not accepting guests." My words were as cold as the air that rushed in from outside when I opened the door. Samuel's face was worn and tired, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. He stared at me, trying to find the right words, but there was nothing in his eyes, just an overwhelming sense of loss, or maybe regret. After a long moment of silence, I broke it. "Oh, by the way, I should congratulate you. You married Alice, didn't you? And became a father, right?" I couldn't stop myself from saying it. The words came out almost spitefully, like they were coated in the bitterness I'd been holding in for months. I watched as his face drained of color, his breathing grew ragged, almost as if my words had physically struck him. The tension in the air thickened, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction, a small sense of justice. I stared at him confused. "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" I asked, my voice tinged with a hint of mock concern. Samuel's eyes were filled with a depth of sorrow and regret, a sadness that seemed to weigh down every word he spoke. "Grace." His voice cracked slightly, as if the burden of what he was about to say had been too heavy to carry alone. "That's not the case. Alice, she passed away 2 months ago. It was advanced cervical cancer." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to grasp the truth of what I had just heard. The world around me seemed to blur, the sounds of the office fading into the background as I struggled to process the impossible. What did you say?" "Alice is dead." My voice came out disbelieving, barely above a whisper. "When did she get cervical cancer?" Samuel's face was a mask of pain, his eyes downcast, as though the very mention of her name pained him. He hesitated for a moment, as if the weight of the confession had taken him to a place he didn't want to revisit. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Last year, on our 3rd anniversary," he began, his words carefully measured. "Actually, I never told you the truth. That night, I wasn't drunk, and it wasn't because she had stomach pains and asked me to stay. The truth is, that night, she found out she had late-stage cervical cancer. A strange, nauseating guilt rose in my chest, making my stomach churn. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mouth was dry and the words wouldn't come. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly, betraying the tremor I felt deep inside. The weight of the question felt heavier than I expected, as though all the years of confusion and hurt were converging on that one moment. Samuel let out a bitter laugh, a hollow, almost hopeless sound that seemed to echo in the silence between us. His eyes, so full of regret and sorrow, looked at me with a quiet, resigned finality. But there was something else there too. A fatigue, as though the burden of keeping this secret had worn him down to the point of exhaustion. "Alice didn't want me to tell you," he said, his tone barely above a whisper, the sadness thick in his voice. "She said that her last wish before she died was for me to be by her side as her boyfriend. She didn't want my selfish actions to cause us to divorce, and she genuinely hoped we could stay out of each other's way quietly, without drawing attention. But, it's impossible to hide something like that for long." The air between us felt thick, charged with the weight of unsaid words, and yet all I could feel was confusion and disbelief. I swallowed hard, the knot in my throat tightening, before I managed to force out the next question, the one that had been gnawing at me for so long, the one that had kept me awake at night. "I know you probably thought that before I divorced you. Alice was carrying my child," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my lips. "And that I was following her to the maternity ward. But the truth is, I was with her for her cervical cancer checkups, not for a pregnancy test." The truth of those words hit me like a wave, and I struggled to stay upright as the weight of them threatened to bring me to my knees. I could see the subtle shift in Samuel's expression, the flicker of pain and sympathy crossing his face as he leaned forward slightly, as though bracing himself for the next part of this painful conversation. You can't blame her for always being hostile towards you, he said, his voice soft and tinged with sadness. After all, she loved me for so many years. There was a distant look in his eyes, as if he were remembering something long gone, a time that now seemed so far removed from the reality we were living in. But now, everything is in the past, and I don't want to dwell on it anymore. I just hope you can let go of your feelings and move on. His words hung in the air, heavy with the finality of it all. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, but there was something else too, a quiet plea, as though he was asking for forgiveness for things that had already been said and done. I wanted to tell him that I was still hurt, that I couldn't just move on so easily, but the words stuck in my throat, caught between the past and the present, between everything I had thought I knew and the truth that Samuel had just laid before me. His words hung in the air like a dense fog, thick and suffocating, leaving me uncertain of what to make of them. I stared at him, my gaze searching his eyes, those once warm eyes that had been filled with affection. Now they were clouded with a mixture of remorse and something deeper, something that almost looked like apology. It was strange, unsettling, but for a fleeting moment, I felt something stir in my chest. Not forgiveness, no, but something akin to understanding. It was there and gone in an instant, a brief flicker of emotion that I quickly pushed aside. So you specifically came to see me today to clear up this misunderstanding? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost hesitant, betraying a hint of the vulnerability I had buried for so long. The question lingered between us, the words hanging in the air like an unanswered prayer. Samuel's lips curled into what could only be described as a reluctant smile, strained, tired, as if the effort to express anything even remotely positive was too much for him. It's not just about that, his words faltered, and for a moment his eyes dropped, avoiding mine, before he met my gaze again. There was something raw in his expression now, something unguarded. I also wanted to ask if we could remarry. My parents have been scolding me for a year now, he added, his voice laced with frustration, tinged with an exhaustion I hadn't heard in so long. It caught me off guard, a stab of emotion I wasn't prepared for. The weight of his request hung between us like a heavy stone, pressing down on my chest. I felt a cold shiver race down my spine as memories of the divorce resurfaced, the devastation, the lies, the deceit that had shattered everything we once were. The sharp ache of that final goodbye had never fully faded, and now it seemed like he was asking for a second chance at something that could never be repaired. I couldn't stop myself. The question slipped out before I could rein it in. Didn't you say that Alice didn't want you to divorce me because of her selfishness? Why did you agree to the divorce later? The words were out before I could stop them, and the moment they left my lips, the room seemed to contract around us, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. Samuel froze, his eyes locking onto mine. For a heartbeat, he didn't speak, as if the weight of my question had rendered him momentarily speechless. His face was unreadable for a beat, the silence stretching between us like an eternity, before he finally opened his mouth. His voice was low, barely a whisper, as though he were confessing something far too painful to say aloud. To be honest, don't blame me for this, but at that time, I really did think about burning all bridges. I thought maybe I could gather the courage to end things with you once and for all. After all, as you know, our marriage was just a transaction. I wanted to make it up to Alice before she passed. I wanted to give her the wedding of her dreams. His words hung in the air, heavy with regret, and he sighed deeply, his shoulders slumped as though the weight of his own admission had crushed him, his vulnerability now exposed in a way I hadn't seen before. That was my decision, and it had nothing to do with Alice. As his words sank in, something within me shifted. A strange sense of relief washed over me, as though the weight I had been carrying inside had lightened, even if only by a fraction. It was almost like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest easing just a little. I spoke, my voice steady, but there was a quiet finality to it. Well then, I wish you well. You fulfilled the last wish of the woman you loved. Samuel's gaze held mine for a moment longer, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled me, a lingering emotion, something I couldn't quite place, a flicker of uncertainty, or perhaps regret. It unsettled me, leaving me wondering if he had truly come to terms with everything that had happened between us. Then, after a long silence, he spoke again, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite grasp. But the reason I came today, he began, his words slow and deliberate, is that I want to remarry you. I froze. The words hit me like a slap, and I couldn't move. I stared at him, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what he had just said. The confusion and disbelief bubbled up inside me, an overwhelming flood of emotions. Samuel, I stammered, the words coming out before I could stop them. You really caught me off guard. You said you needed to gather the courage to leave me. Since we're already divorced, why would you want to remarry? I know you don't love me. A shift seemed to happen in his expression, his eyes, which had been steady just a moment ago, suddenly turned red, the color deepening as if something inside him cracked. because after Alice died, I realized I had fallen in love with you." His voice was raw, tinged with a kind of vulnerability that I hadn't expected. I blinked, feeling the air around us thicken with his words. But the shock hadn't quite settled yet. "Then, would you be willing to accept me again and try to start over?" His voice softened, almost pleading, as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee in front of me, holding out a diamond ring. The light from the overhead lamp caught the facets of the ring, making it sparkle like some sort of cruel illusion. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. His sincerity, the look in his eyes, almost convinced me. I could feel my resolve wavering, like a fragile thread being pulled too tightly. But then, in the silence that followed, reality began to seep in and the confusion began to clear. I stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts, my heartbeat steadied with a calm I didn't expect. I met his eyes and shook my head slowly. "I'm sorry, I can't accept," I said, my voice clear, even if it quivered slightly at the edges. Samuel looked up at me, his face etched with disbelief, the surprise apparent in his eyes. "Why? Don't you love me anymore?" A bitter smile tugged at my lips, and I let out a small, almost empty laugh. "Samuel, from the time you reluctantly agreed to marry me to our entire marriage, you've been acting. You've played the role so well that I almost believed it myself. But you can't fool your eyes. There's never been any love for me in them, haven't you noticed?" I paused, watching his face shift with each word I spoke. "Every time we look at each other, your gaze is unfocused, like you're somewhere else entirely. But I've seen the way you look at Alice. It's different. It's intense, passionate, and deep, as if you want to see straight into her soul. And that's the truth of it, Samuel." His breath hitched slightly, and for a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. But I wasn't done. I had to say it all. "And you and Alice, don't try to deny it, you didn't just start your relationship a year ago when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. You've been involved since you were teenagers, and when she came back to the country 2 years ago, that's when everything reignited. Your feelings for her didn't begin when she was sick, they never truly went away." I took a small step back, my heart steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "And now what you call suddenly realizing you love me is nothing more than a habit. You've gotten used to having me around these past few years. Now that Alice is gone, you're just feeling empty without me, right? You miss the familiarity, but it's not love." Samuel's face had gone pale, his confusion turning into something darker. His expression shifted rapidly, his mind clearly racing to process everything I had just said. "So you think I never really loved you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if the weight of his own words was too much to bear. I let out a bitter laugh, a small chuckle that carried no joy. "Yes, Samuel. You never loved me from the start, and you never will. What you feel now is just the lingering memory of habit combined with the pressure from your parents who have never let you breathe. But I don't want to go into it any further. Take care of yourself, and please don't come looking for me again." My voice was calm, but my heart was heavy, each word a slow, painful release. With that, I turned, and without looking back, I closed the door softly behind me. Not all love can be rekindled. Some things are better left in the past, where they belong. After the new year, I boarded a flight to Ocean City, feeling a mixture of excitement and anticipation. As the plane ascended into the sky, the hum of the engine became a steady backdrop to the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. My career was about to take a fresh start, and with it, I was ready to leave behind the weight of the past life. After all, life isn't just about love. There are so many other things worth pursuing, so many other dreams to chase. The air in Ocean City felt different, brisk, filled with the promise of new beginnings. The year passed in a blur of work and growth, and then I heard the unexpected news. Samuel, of all people, had entered a monastery. The news hit me like a sharp breath, surprising and strangely distant. His branch office, once bustling with activity, was now left without a leader, and the company was in disarray. Part of me wondered what had driven him to such a drastic change, but I quickly pushed the thought aside. His choices no longer affected my life, not in the way they once did. I reported this development to the headquarters of my company, and within days, they decided to acquire Samuel's company. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction as I watched the wheels of corporate strategy turn, knowing I had played my part in the shift. The acquisition was swift, and soon the leadership of Samuel's once thriving office was handed over to someone new, someone from my company. Thanks to my performance and the rapid growth I'd helped cultivate, I was promoted. The offer to transfer to the group headquarters came as a surprise, but it was a welcome one. The promotion to vice president was a clear acknowledgement of my hard work and dedication. It was a moment of triumph, but not just for the title or the prestige. What mattered was that it marked the beginning of a new chapter. As I settled into my new role at the group headquarters, the transition was both exciting and overwhelming. The office, perched on the 25th floor of a sleek glass building, offered a stunning panoramic view of the city skyline. I would often pause at the window, gazing out at the bustling streets below, lost in thought. The rhythm of the city was both a reminder of the world I was now a part of and a quiet reassurance that I had taken the right path. Days turned into weeks, and while the work was demanding, there was a sense of fulfillment in every project I oversaw. The headquarters was a hive of activity, with the air always thick with the energy of people pushing themselves to meet deadlines, brainstorm new ideas, or negotiate important deals. My team was talented, and for the first time, I felt truly valued for my abilities. One late afternoon, as I was sifting through a stack of reports, my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from Samuel. "Grace, can we talk?" My fingers hovered over the phone, my heart racing. I hadn't heard from him in months, and the last thing I expected was for him to reach out now after everything. A mixture of frustration and curiosity flooded over me. Why no? Why after all this time, when everything in my life was finally starting to come together? I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, torn between wanting to hear him out and the painful memories that resurfaced every time I thought of him. Finally, I exhaled deeply, placed my phone back down, and forced myself to focus on the tasks at hand. But the thoughts lingered like an unwelcome shadow. I had worked so hard to put him and the past behind me, to carve out a future that didn't revolve around his mistakes and lies. The idea of him somehow showing up again felt like a disruption to the delicate balance I had so carefully built. The next morning, my assistant knocked on my door, her expression a little too serious. "Grace, there's a Mr. Brooks here to see you. He says it's urgent." I felt a chill sweep over me, my gut clenched. Samuel was standing in front of my office door. I hadn't seen him in person for months, but the familiar, almost magnetic pull I had once felt toward him was gone. What remained was a faint echo, a ghost of what had been. He looked different, tired, older perhaps, with shadows under his eyes and a few more lines on his face, as though time had caught up with him. "Grace," he said softly as I stepped into the doorway, his voice carrying a note of vulnerability I hadn't heard before. "I know you probably don't want to see me, and I wouldn't blame you, but I need to apologize for everything." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I could hear nothing but the rush of blood in my ears. I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the conflicting emotions that swirled inside me. Anger, resentment, and a strange, aching sadness all battled for dominance. "Samuel," I finally said, my voice steady but cold. "You have no idea what you put me through. No apology will undo that. You had your chance." He took a step closer, as if my words hadn't quite reached him, his eyes searching mine, desperate for some sign that there was still a possibility of reconciliation. "I know I hurt you," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "But I've changed, Grace. I'm not the same person anymore. What happened with Alice, it was a mistake." I was confused, and I lost sight of what really mattered. I took a deep breath, my heart racing in my chest. He was still the same, still trying to make me believe that his words could fix everything. But the truth was, I wasn't the same person I had been when I was with him. I was stronger now, more independent, and most importantly, I had learned to rely on myself, not him. "I'm glad you found clarity, Samuel," I said quietly, meeting his gaze. "But my life has moved on. I've moved on." I could see the hurt in his eyes, but there was no turning back now. The woman who had once clung to him in desperation, waiting for him to choose her, was long gone. In her place was someone who understood that life, with all its twists and turns, could be beautiful even without him. With one last lingering look, Samuel turned and walked away, disappearing into the elevator. As I stood there, my heart heavy with a mix of relief and regret, the rest of the day passed in a blur. My thoughts kept drifting back to that moment, but as the hours went by, I felt the weight of it lift. I had made peace with my past. Samuel's appearance had only confirmed that he was a chapter that I had closed long ago, and no matter how hard he tried to open it again, the story had already been written. As I sat at my desk later that evening, gazing out at the city lights twinkling below, I realized that the future was finally mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was content with the direction it was taking.